Welcome to the Due Diligence Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and for more than 10 years with SNN, I've been doing interviews with MicroCap management teams at investor conferences globally as well as online. Our SNN Live CEO video interviews are meant to pique interest, and then one can discover more by going to that company website. But personally, I always have more questions I want to ask. On this show, I'll be chatting with public company executives from microcap companies, and we'll dive deeper into companies that are rarely profiled. Microcap traditionally is overlooked, unloved, and absolutely never featured on legacy financial media outlets unless something material is going on. That's a good story. With my experience interviewing management teams, having interviewed most of them before, I've built up a network of companies, so there will be no shortage of content. Furthermore, this is an opportunity for me to showcase some of the qualitative lessons I've learned from guests on the Planet MicroCap podcast. You can expect high-quality interviews with management teams that may have exposure to broader macro trends that you may never have thought of. One of the many reasons why I love the microcap space. So if you love microcaps and especially love learning about companies before the professionals do, let's start our due diligence. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast. My guest on the show today is Jeff Thramann. He is the executive chairman of Auddia Inc., publicly traded company. The symbol is AUUD on NASDAQ. Auddia is focused on reinventing how consumers engage with audio through the development of a proprietary AI platform for audio and technologies for podcasts. Auddia offers two industry firsts: the ability to listen to any AM, FM radio station with added personalized content and no commercials, as well as podcasts with an interactive digital feed that supports deeper stories and delivers digital revenue to podcasters. As a podcaster myself, I'm always interested in learning about new technologies that could benefit our audience's listening experience. So I was interested in diving deeper with Jeff about the faidr and vodcast applications, reactions to the applications so far, and the marketing plan to reach critical mass, the barriers to entry from other larger audio streamers. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Jeff Thramann, executive chairman of Auddia Inc. Welcome to the Due Diligence Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and joining me today is Jeff Thramann. He is the executive chairman of Auddia Inc. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is AUUD on NASDAQ. And just so happens they happen to be a constituent on our index, the MicroCap Review Index for Q2 2022. And with that, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. So we actually did an interview not that long ago, one of our short form CEO video interviews that we traditionally do. But we're going to I wanted to dig into the story a bit more because, hey, you're on a podcast. I host all these big podcast networks. So I wanted to understand, the faidr app and the Vodacast app a bit more. But before we get into all of that, if you could explain, what does the company do in one sentence, that one liner?
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially a technology company. So, we're a technology company focusing on really reinventing how consumers can engage with audio, all forms of audio. But our initial focus is really on broadcast radio and podcasting.
Very good. Now, what was the original problem that audio was trying to solve, and how has that evolved or changed over time?
The original problem goes back a long ways, all the way back to 2011, and the company at the time was called Clip Interactive. And the original problem we were trying to solve back then, it dealt with radio, but it was more along the lines of how do you interact with radio if you hear something on the radio that you want to attend to. So specifically, I was driving down the road in my car and I heard an ad on the radio for an Ice Capades event. It was a Christmas show that I was going to bring my girls to, and I never went. And I was thinking about that a month later, and I thought to myself, it'd be cool if I could just Shazam that show, have the tickets show up, buy the tickets, go to the show, show on my phone, and be done with it. And so we looked at that, and at the time we thought it would be a really cool way for radio to really sell songs, to give attribution to their advertisers and that sort of thing. So that's the product we built first.
Before we get into diving a little bit deeper on the product itself and how it now evolved into what it is today, what was your background prior to founding Auddia?
Yeah, so my background was a little unusual. I come to the space, when I describe my background, I talk about being a serial entrepreneur and an inventor. I've taken a number of companies from zero to exit, all in the healthcare space. And, I'm the named inventor on something north of 130 patents, issued or pending throughout, both in the US and internationally. So I just kind of come up with ideas and I spin up companies around those. But what I was doing before this was I was actually in medicine, and I was a neurosurgeon, and I had invented a new way to help fuse the spine together, built a big company out of that. And that got me out of the neurosurgery space because the government has some rules and regulations about having ownership position in a private company where you can use those products on your patients. So that kind of got me out. And, like I said, just came up with the idea while I was driving down the road, and, off I went with saying, hey, I'm going to build a company around this. Very
good. All right, let's dig into the business a bit further. We have the faidr app, spelled FAIDR, and Vodacast application as well. So let's start with a description of the faidr app. What does it do? How does it work?
Yeah, faidr is the AI-based platform, and essentially what we give the consumer with that is the ability to listen to any AM FM radio station in a personalized manner. Right today, if you tune into any station, or since the beginning of time, if you tune into any AM FM radio station, you get what they give you, and there's no way around it. You can change stations, but you're stuck with it. And one of the things that they do is they provide frequent interruptions. And if you look at ads in particular, it's about 16 minutes per hour of ads on a radio station on average. So what we do is we're kind of taking, and one thing about radio that they do have that nobody else has is local content, right? So that's really the big staying power there. No other platform has that. So what we do is we essentially take that platform that is still very popular, 250 million people still listening every month. We give them a way to deliver their content in a personalized manner to consumers. So the consumer has a choice over what they're hearing. They can skip stuff they don't want to hear. They can cover commercials with other content. So we give them that capability, and they can then get access to subscription revenue. So that's really the big consumer value proposition is get this app. You'll get every radio station that's available out there. You can listen to it in a customized manner, skip stuff that you don't like, never hear another commercial if you don't want. And then we provide all these other different content choices that you can pull in, which some of those can be super interesting, especially when it comes to new music discovery and new artists in a local environment.
Got it. And then on the other side, what's incentivizing the AM FM radio stations to want to now be on the Auddia platform?
Well, you look at their ad revenue overall, from their peak back before there was fragmentation of media, it used to be TV, print, and radio, and they got all the ad dollars, right? And then digital came about, and then all of media fragmented into all these different, things that are out there, and advertisers are trying to reach everybody, so they got to sprinkle it all around. So you look at the heyday of radio running about $25 billion a year in ad revenue, and now running somewhere in the $15 billion range. It's a huge hit. And you look at the number of people that are looking at audio subscriptions. There's about 141 million people spending about $14 billion a year on audio subscriptions, and radio gets absolutely zero of that. They don't have the ability. So we bring them into that subscription world. Subscription revenue is way better than ad revenue. It's reliable. It's monthly. There's no sales cost to going out and getting it. And for the way we model this out, because we share a lot of revenue with the broadcasters if they're going to participate on the platform, they can make more money per subscriber than they can on the ad model. So on the ad model, they average about $4.75 or so per month, for every listener. And on the subscription side, our premium subscription, we believe, is going to support an $11.99 price point. And we share that with them. They can almost double the amount they get for everybody that just flips over to this premium environment.
Got it. And how come they haven't thought of doing this themselves before, right? You would think that like a K-Rock here in LA would, that's a huge brand. Or I mean, it's not just LA, just nationally. Like, why haven't they thought to do something like this already?
Yeah, well, now you get into really get into the weeds of music licensing and rights and that sort of thing. So when radio plays a song over the radio, they don't pay the artist or the label anything, right? There's no payment. They have to pay the publisher and the songwriter, but they don't pay the artist or the label anything. So that's a very lucrative model for them, right? If you look at Spotify and Pandora and SXM and all the competitors, they all have to pay a fairly significant amount for that. And one of the reasons radio doesn't have to pay is because it's freely available, and they're able to drive a lot of discovery for the artists, right? Still today, the number one thing the artists want is, hey, spin me on radio, because that's how I'm going to really get into the mainstream. So you have that, you have that really lucrative model there on the music side. Now, when they stream their station, as long as they don't change it around, they can stream under a statutory rate in the copyright law. And that's the same rate that Pandora uses on their free model or Spotify uses on their free model. It's a fairly reasonable payment. So you can still make money as a service on that, but not nearly the amount of money you're going to make on the broadcast advertising side. So radio doesn't have a super strong interest in streaming over there. So then if they want to go get the subscription revenue, which is what makes this lucrative, they lose access to those statutory rates. Now they need direct contracts with the music industry, just like Spotify and everybody else has. And I mean, look how big Spotify is, and they can't make any money. And they probably never will consistently unless they get more and more podcast listening, but they never will on the music side, because as they make more money, the music industry just raises the rates they have to pay on those direct contracts, right? So radio wouldn't be able to get access to those statutory rates, and then they would lose a ton of money if they did this. So it really doesn't work for them. They need a third party to be in the middle of this, and then they need to be able to, participate in the subscription that way. So that's why we built it the way we did.
Interesting. So I mean, does Auddia face any of that statutory rate risk or because you're the third party?
Yeah, you lose that if you're what's called the transmitting entity. Like if we were broadcasting these stations out there and being the transmitting entity behind the content, that would be a problem. But that's not what we do. When somebody downloads our app, they're essentially downloading what on the video world is equivalent to a DVR, right? They're downloading a digital audio recorder. So when they select a station on their app, that's essentially the user selecting what station they want to record. So they're recording that on the phone, and we've shrunk our AI model down to operate on their phone as well. So that's kind of like technology built within the DVR, right, to process out commercials. So that's what they're able to do. They can sit there and listen to the recording with our AI. They can identify the content that they don't want to listen to. And then when they do that, we are able to switch them to other content. Now, that other content might be music, and we, Auddia, might have to be streaming that to them, but we have our own licenses and our own statutory rates that can go through that to provide that music that we pay out.
I see. So you're already working with some of the I guess, what is it, the labels and all that stuff to try to make sure that you're covered there? Because
exactly right. We have all the licenses to do all of that stuff for the part that we do.
Got it. When was faidr launched? It was fairly recently, right?
Yeah, we've been in the marketplace with what we call the Auddia app, which was a predecessor, just trialing it out with some broadcasters for about 6 months, from last year. And then on February 15th, we launched faidr with about 4,500 stations on the platform. only the music stations are what we call faidr enabled right now. They have all this capability. We're not yet there on the news talk sports algorithm. So the AI, it's easier to identify the difference between music and a commercial and a talk. It's a little bit different to identify talk from commercials. And we have a lot of music data. That's where we started. Then we started with a lot of commercial data. We're still in the process of acquiring more talk data to get that algorithm to the point where we want it.
Got it. And what's been some of the initial reactions thus far since the relaunch, I guess you'd say, under the faidr label?
Yeah, this starts to get into the depths of things that are somewhat proprietary right now, just because we have to give it some time to be able to report out the results. And I can tell you, our investor base is basically looking at. They're all geared up to say, okay, what are the results? So we put out guidance that we would release our first results on how the launch was going at about 3 months after the February 15th launch. So we're looking about mid-May for that. And what we were doing is it's not a huge it's a huge nationwide launch, meaning that anybody can get the app. But from a marketing perspective, we have a limited spend. We're spending about $250,000. We're trying to drive about 10,000 MAUs on that and 50,000, installs. So we're trying to get that cost per install down into the $5 range. And there's some learnings that you have to go through on the digital spend and how you then layer in additional spend on top of that to really maximize those efficiencies. So we're going through that process, but those are the targets we're looking to get. And we did put out, results after we ran a small campaign up in Sonoma County with the radio stations that were local there. It was with the broadcasters in partnership with them, where they were going on air and saying, hey, you can get this product and listen to our stations in a premium environment. We weren't charging anything, but what we learned there is that we were seeing really good cost, to install rates. And what we want to do is replicate that on a national basis and see if we could improve on that with the having more stations in on faidr. So we'll be putting those results out, on the 15th of May, or perhaps earlier if we see something we like. Got it.
So how does faidr compare to, like, I'd say your closest competitor is probably what, Sirius? Would you say? Is Sirius the closest comp?
Yeah, Sirius is one. We look at two groups of categories as competitors. One is the other radio station streaming aggregators, right? And that would be like iHeart, that would be TuneIn, that would be Odyssey, and then you have us, really. And the advantage we have with that is we're the only ones that have every radio station out there, right? Others, you have to be permissioned to be on those platforms. Since we're not really putting any radio stations on the platform, all we have is a directory listing all the public URLs that are out there. It's the consumer that's selecting those, right? So we can have any station on there. And that's what we do. So we're the first aggregator to have the full dial replicated. And then the other big advantage we provide is that, and this is because how it's architected, right? Where you're actually recording it and listening back in a slight delay, a couple of, a minute or two, behind what's on the stream. By doing that, we give you all this control, and none of those guys have any of that control. So that's really where we position ourselves on the aggregators. Then you have the music players, right? That's the Spotify's, the Apple Music, Amazon, whatever. And they're just really playlists, right? You get in there, you build your playlist. There's no local content. It's not really radio. We consider them competitors just because they're in the music space, but there's no real head-to-head there. The big advantage we have over them, we believe, is access to that local content that you want. And that's where we sit there. And then SiriusXM, of course, I put them more like the music players. It's radio, but it's national. There's no local flavor there. So we're like SiriusXM for local radio stations, really.
It's interesting that this take on local, because I'm a big fan of Bill Simmons' podcast. And one thing that they've done at Spotify is that I thought has been interesting. They've been starting to open up more local podcasts that cover the local markets, like New York with John Jastrzemski. Just I can't say it. I'm like fighting a cold, but they also have a Chicago one as well. So it's interesting that was that some of the thought process where there's been folks that are living in LA, but they're from New York and, they want to get access to some of those local stations. I mean, I know some of the other platforms do that already, but it's kind of interesting that it seems like you saw that trend going.
Well, it's just a matter. You look for what's most relevant to you. The information that's most relevant to you is local information, and you can't get it anywhere on any of the streaming platforms. If you listen to Spotify and you want to know about what local bands are starting to move in Boulder and Denver and starting to pick up, who knows that information? It's the DJs at the stations. They know them. They're bringing them into the studio. They're talking to them. They can do all these capabilities, and we're providing, an avenue to get that local stuff much better. And that applies to everything. It applies to, if there's a big fire out here in Boulder, you're going to listen to radio. You want to know what's going on. Nobody else has it. There's no podcast that's going to be, let me go get the local Boulder fire podcast, right? It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. But podcasting is encroaching on this, right? And they are starting to get there. So this is the first local competition that radio is seeing. And local, in my mind, is radio's last stand. It's the last thing that they have. So, we're providing a platform where they can showcase that local stuff. They can put in more local bonus content because we got to try to cover 16 hours or 16 minutes of ads per hour with something. And that something can be premium local content if the radio really gets behind it and does it. But podcasters are going to have that opportunity to get in there too, because the consumer selects. If you like that local New York show, and that's what you want, you can select that regardless of what the radio station is going to be putting out there.
Absolutely. Does it grind your gears when people tell you, or like, hey man, I thought radio was dead. It's gone. Who listens to radio anymore? What do you say back to folks? Like, I guess me, I'm trying to pretend like I'm other people saying that to you, but let's say I just said that to you, like I just did a second ago.
well, to me, it's just about the data, right? People have all kinds of opinions, right? And they are what they are, but but the data tells the story. And if you look at time spent listening on audio, all platforms, all takers, radio dominates. And you can talk about, hey, well, yeah, it's really hard to reach, the 18-year-old or the whatever it's running around on Instagram and TikTok and whatever. And that's true. And that's always going to be true. But that 18-year-old at some point is going to be a 30-year-old, and they're going to have a job, and they're not going to be running around on Instagram and taking pictures of themselves and putting unicorns on their forehead, right? This is not going to happen. They're going to be living more of a life where they gravitate into that, and they're going to want somebody to help curate some of that stuff. And there's going to be less time to do those sort of things. So people go through the funnel. And, one of the really interesting things about radio, again, back to the data, and we saw this with our first product where we had 1.6 million monthly active radio listeners on the platform. And we looked at the demographic of those 1.6 million. It exactly matched the demographic of the United States. It wasn't like it was, a bunch of the 65 plus sitting there on radio. We had everybody. And I look at my own kids, right? I don't pay for my kids to have subscriptions. If they want a subscription, they got to pay for it themselves. They all listen to radio.
Absolutely. So last question on the faidr app, because I do want to get to Vodacast in a second, but you mentioned a little bit about the go-to-market strategy. What's that critical mass that you're hoping to get to? If you can tell us, what's that critical mass you're hoping to get to where then you're going to open up the subscribe, because I'm guessing it's pre-rev right now, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's pre-rev. And we're going to convert that over to figuring out who will move over to subscription, right? And we have our aspirational goals on subscription pricing of $11.99 at the premium tier and $5.99 at the step down tier. And then we're going to have the free tier. So we don't really have a critical mass. What we look for is conversion rates. And with conversion rates, we can then model what happens, with volume. And we can also model what it's going to cost us to drive that revenue. So that's really what we're focused on, right? So step one is what's the cost per install? Can we get that down to a reasonable number? And is that indicative of the message resonating with consumers? I think we've already said we're doing very well there, right? We put that out in Sonoma. The message resonates, and we hope to be able to support that with the results that we put out with our faidr launch, right? So people will be looking for that information. From there, we're then going to look at, okay, now we can get people on the platform. What does it take to convert them over to a subscriber? Do we need additional features? Do we need additional content? What's the price point or the discounts that we want to offer in the beginning until we get the product up to where we want it to be? For instance, News Talk Sports right now is not faidr enabled. We definitely want to have that in place before we start even contemplating going after premium subscription numbers. So then you got to play around with all of that and you got to dial it in. But over the next few months, we're going to know what does it cost to drive an install? What does it cost to take an install to a subscription? What can we reasonably expect to get on revenue on those subscriptions? And then from there, we can say, hey, we invest, $10 million in marketing, and we're going to drive, $3 million in monthly recurring revenue or whatever it is. That's where we want to get, because that then dictates everything.
Absolutely. All right. I now want to transition to the other app under the audio platform of Vodacast. Can you describe the app for those that aren't familiar with it and the problem it's looking to solve there?
Yeah, Vodacast is, it's a player. It's just a podcast player to start with. So, and there's a lot of players out there, but we're looking to differentiate. So the big differentiators we're bringing to the table are, one is an interactive digital feed that's on the platform. And that essentially is video, text, images that correlate with what the podcaster might be talking about. So a lot of times the podcasters are doing research about their shows and they're finding information. They got no place really to put it. And we have this piece of software, it's called the Hub. So when they're doing their research, if they're doing it all through the Hub, they can just simply with the web browser click on things and it goes directly into the feed, and all this content then becomes available to the listener. And if you can drive eyeballs to that feed, you can drive digital revenue dollars. And that's really what we're trying to bring to the table with that product, because podcasters right now only can make money with the audio ads, and there's very limited inventory for that. So if you can create a separate digital channel and drive eyeballs there, that becomes important, not only for revenue, but it also starts to create this interactive capability, which we can talk about in a little bit too. But that's the number one thing we're bringing. And then the second thing is micropayments. So people can then, there's plenty of subscription paywalls out there. There's plenty of tip jars and donation platforms that people can have. And we're going to include those too. So we're going to have everything available for podcasters to monetize. But the unique ones are going to be this digital feed revenue and these micropayments. So that is somebody who may not be a subscriber, is never going to subscribe. They're not going to pay a subscription. But for today, they want to listen to this particular podcast episode, and they want to listen without ads. You just hit that icon, you pay 25 cents, and you consume it without ads. And a 25% payment is about, 5x over what you would get on a CPM when you play that out.
Got it. So how would you say Vodacast? So do you have IP protecting Vodacast? Because the one thing that whenever, like as a podcaster, when I think about it, I get it. Like from my end, I can now customize my own page. It's right. When I set it up, I can customize it, put, other images, maybe. I host a video and audio podcast. So I'd be able to put both the video maybe and the audio version. Right.
Right.
So do you have some IP protecting this whole formula here? Because I would assume that I'm sure, the Spotify's of the world and some of these other podcast streamers would want to look at this because they understand that there is, some of the opportunities that you spoke about.
Yeah. So, the product that we originally built for radio was based on creating an interactive digital content feed for everything that you heard on air. And we filed a number of patents around that platform. So we're doing sort of the same thing here. So that IP, we haven't analyzed it to how well it covers that, but a lot of the core stuff that we were doing there would probably be implicated on those patents for what we're doing on the Vodacast side as well. But, even without that, there is a first mover advantage type of thing to be out there. And we're also looking to build all of our capabilities as tools. So you see a lot of subscription platforms that are built, and then any podcasting platform can pick those up. We are going to make, out through SDKs or APIs, we're going to make ours integratable into Apple. If they want to put this feed on there, it can be there. If Spotify wants to put the feed on there, it can be there. That becomes more of a SaaS play that they can use. And the reason you want consistency there is you want one feed that the podcaster can develop that then is going to export to all the different platforms. Otherwise, it's just going to be torture for the podcaster, right? You're not going to build a feed for the Spotify platform, another feed for the Apple platform. It gets unwieldy. So we're trying to do is kind of be a de facto standard that can get distributed out to all of those platforms. So your full audience can see it when you make one feed. And that's really a first mover advantage.
Absolutely. And so what's been the response thus far with Vodacast? Because this from what I looked up, it was launched in 2020, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been on the App Store a long time. It was on the App Store a long time just because our tech team didn't like the other players they're all big podcast fans. So they built this, and they were all using it as their listening app for podcasts. We were back in 2020, we were still working our way towards getting financing. We were originally supposed to do our IPO the month that the country went into lockdown on COVID. So we were in a kind of an emergency situation where we couldn't really do anything new. So we were just playing around with stuff, and the guys built that, and we had it on there for a while. We really didn't start putting marketing dollars behind Vodacast until recently. It's very similar to what we're doing with faidr, but there we're spending about $150,000. Again, trying to drive close to 50,000 downloads and about 100,000 MAUs. And we're using both, both faidr, the 10,000 MAUs there, and the 10,000 MAUs on Vodacast as a test site, a test bed to really then see how are people using the app. So the big things we want to know with Vodacast are how much are people going to that digital feed when it's available. And we've put out numbers already on that, which are super strong, right? 95% of the people that go to a podcast that has an interactive feed are going to the feed. They're consuming the content. 30% are consuming more than 50% of that content. So that's highly monetizable digital revenue, with that kind of user activity. So we're seeing that there. But that was done when we had about, 1,800 downloads, I think. And we're looking to see that, carry forward with 50,000 downloads and 10,000 MAUs, looking at that and then layering in the micropayment capability and seeing how people use that as well.
For sure. And one last question on the Vodacast side. What's been the response from the content creator, the podcaster community? How do you just bring all their stuff on there, or do they have to go through a whole process to now create their page?
Yeah, no, we help them at first. Eventually we hope that they'll be using the hub to create that interactive digital feed. We have some podcasters where their fan base is really interested in doing this, and they get recognition for finding cool content and put it in there. They get the podcast a little early, to get in there, and they feel like they're part of the team. So we have some of that going on. But the podcaster reception is really solid. But we need to get more users right on the platform. That's the big thing. So that's why we're kind of still in a test environment to get those 10,000 MAUs, and that becomes a test bed for all these little capabilities. But the podcasters love all the tools we're coming up with. So when you start talking about interactivity in the digital feed, it starts leading into other things. Like we have talkback features where the podcaster can set up like a Clubhouse type conversation, and other members can join that. So this interactivity starts creating a little bit of a social capability, because then you can start following other people in the community that might be listening to your podcast. If you like what they have to say, you can follow them. You can discover other podcasts. You can have social conversations about what you're putting out there. So it's creating all of this capability. And then we also allow them to bring in what we call a brand page. So for anything that they have on their websites, there's videos, their social posts, anything can be all in one space. So they create They carve out their own kind of brand within the Vodacast platform for all that interactivity with their fans, for all the monetization capabilities, and for all that social stuff. So that's where we're going with it for them.
Got it. All right. So my next question for you, we went through both the platforms, the technology underneath from Auddia, but what do investors maybe still get confused or misunderstand when after they just did their half-hour one-on-one like we just did, understanding the platform and where you're going? What are still kind of the missing link for them?
Yeah, I think, when I talk to to investors, they tend to either focus on faidr or Vodacast, honestly. And we, if you have 30 minutes, we wind up talking about one, and focusing our time on that. But when I look at the overall faidr concept and what we're doing there, and this just doesn't go with investors, I think this goes with anybody following our story, including analysts. I don't think people understand the magnitude of what we're doing. They don't understand that radio is still the dominant audio listening platform, right? They are the 800-pound gorilla in audio, and everybody has discounted them. They've just forgotten about them and said, hey, they're just going to be sitting there broadcasting into oblivion. Well, technology platforms are going to come in and recognize that opportunity, and they're going to give that 800-pound gorilla an opportunity to play in the space at the same level that these other players are playing in the space, right? With personalization, with subscription, with a premium listening environment, with additional content. So I think that's what's underappreciated. The fact that we're bringing these guys to the table, and that's where I think the potential opportunity is. As soon as we get that data out there and we're able to show that consumers like this, if you're an analyst following any of those other platforms, you're going to have to know our story and you're going to have to follow it. And I think that's the big differential between what people see with us now and what they're going to see from us as soon as we are able to make a little bit more inroads.
Got it. It's been a difficult run for kind of growth stocks right now. I mean, what's been that experience like for you in talking with investors where, you're seeing some of these big streamers, you're seeing some dips, and probably understanding what you're up against too, and, still pre-rev, growing, trying to get, what are some of those conversations like right now, and how do you handle them?
Listen, there's still a lot of interest in our stock and what we're doing. And,
Sure.
So when I have the investor meetings, I go to the investor meetings. I mean, my schedule is typically booked out, and I very rarely have a meeting where somebody's like, okay, this is a stupid idea. I don't know why you're trying to do this. Everybody seems to come away with an aha moment, like, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to be watching the data that's coming out. So that's really what we're looking to do. We focus on executing and getting that data out there and telling the investors what data they should be looking for, because it's the same data that we're looking for, right? And
yeah,
and that's gonna tell the story.
Jeff, you're back in your clinical trials days, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is.
You're having flashbacks to it right now.
Stakes are a little different from the human side, but
this is a lot lower stakes for sure. So you're like, all right, there's human trials, and then there's AM/FM radio and podcast subscriptions. Like,
yeah, exactly. Still a big deal for investors. Still big opportunities, yeah. And that's why we're here. It's exciting. And we think we're doing something new. That's what I like to do. I like to focus. I'm not interested in doing another this, that, or the other thing. I like to do new stuff and bring new stuff to the marketplace, and that's what we're doing here. And I think we're going to have a big impact on both sides.
Very good. I still have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
So, how much, if at all, have your shareholders influenced your decision-making process at this point? I mean, it's still early days, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's early days, but listen, one of the great things about being on the public markets is you get this conversation, with the investors, and we're in the process of really ramping that up because we like the feedback we get from the investors, and a lot of our investors are actually users, right? So they're involved in some of these trials. They ping us with support, input, and they give us ideas. And listen, we read all of them, and the good ideas, they go right over to the tech team, and they get funneled into the into the list of improvements that we want to put out there. So there's good advice we get there. There's really, really interesting advice we get from investors from their perspective on how to approach the marketplace, how to look at pricing, how to look at partnerships with broadcasters and with podcasters. So we value that. I mean, there's some great investors in the microcap space is what I'm learning, and they're very approachable, and they're looking for opportunities.
You're going to see a few of them in Vegas. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure exactly when I'm putting out this episode, but just in case it's before Vegas, sure. Jeff is presenting in Vegas. Yeah. So another question that I ask everybody on this show, and this just plain devil's advocate. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of opportunities available with the app and launching it, but I have to do the other side. What would you say are some of Auddia's downside risks?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's exactly what it is for the upside risk, right? So we're going to put out data on how consumers are using this, and we're going to calculate if we spend X amount on marketing dollars, we're able to drive this amount in recurring revenue streams. Those numbers are going to be good or they're going to be bad, right? So the downside is those numbers aren't good, and we have a lot more work to do, and it's going to be longer till we get to any type of transitional point to try to drive value. I would say that's the biggest risk that we have out there is where we are with that. The technology risk is, for the most part, been dissipated over the years. There's still some technology risk left in the algorithm and getting better at being able to identify whether a piece of content that we're analyzing is talk or a commercial. We're really good on music, so it's really getting that to work better. But listen, AI is new. Right, 5 years ago, there was zero chance you could do what we're doing. You couldn't even fit an AI model on a phone, right? So that had to happen. That's like a 2-year-old event, right? That you're even able to do that without destroying the battery. So, it's fast moving. So those are risk factors that you can get over. You can't get over the risk factor of nobody wants to use it, nobody wants to pay for it, right? So that's the real data here. That's what everybody's waiting for. That's what we're waiting for.
Got it. What does when you're thinking about the data, if you're willing to answer this, what does good look like?
Yeah, I don't think we've really dialed that in specifically, but good to me looks like, hey, we can go out and spend, 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million on marketing, and that's going to turn into a recurrent revenue stream that provides an ROI that investors are going to love. That's what it means to me. And our margins in this business are phenomenal. I've already talked about where we are with music rights, at least on faidr, and the technology margin. We don't do anything in the cloud. Everything is operated on the phone. So our cloud is a distributed cloud. It's distributed to everybody's individual phone. So we go from 1 user to 10 million users, and our costs barely move. So those types of things, that margin is hugely important in this business. It's the best margins I've seen in a business if we can scale it up. So the real question is, will people use it? And can we get those people at a reasonable price point?
Got it. So, that pretty much answers my next question. I always like to ask, what is the thesis if realize these are the inflection points that will lead to growth and shareholder value? But I think it really, at right now in the short term, it just comes down to that data readout.
Yeah, it comes down to the data readout for faidr. It comes down to that data readout a little bit for Vodacast. Yep. On the Vodacast side, though, there's some really interesting strategic opportunities to pursue. And we have a vision where, and it's a pretty clear vision, but again, it's dependent on results. It's dependent on consumers wanting to go into those digital feeds. It's dependent on consumers wanting to be a little bit interactive, because let's face it, there's not a ton. The market size for podcasting is still not huge. You're talking about $1 billion ad market, which is good, right? But it's not gigantic. It's not like radio. It's not like a lot of these other markets that are out there. But so you have to drive more revenue opportunities. I think that's what the industry is focused on. That's certainly what we're focused on. And if you can do that, I still think we're early enough where you can become a top 3 to 5 player in the space, and you can be, where we really want to position. We see a really unique opportunity in the podcasting space to be positioned as friends of the podcasters, right? Look at what Apple and Spotify have done with subscription. I mean, it's almost like, are you kidding me? Right? They put up a subscription wall. You can go sign up there. You can join the subscription and you get no data as to who your subscriber is. You have no relationship with them whatsoever. We're the complete opposite, right? We want you to know who your audience is. We want you to build a space within our app. We want to help you build that audience and build that revenue. So that's where we think there's an opportunity for another big player to sit next to those others, but be much more podcaster centric, not platform centric.
Got it. All right. So one more question I got to ask on this.
Sure.
If let's say the data doesn't read out the way you're hoping, or you're signaling will be, this is showing us that, all right, validated. Let's rock. What's plan B? Like, how do you overcome that? And also, is it actually even worth it on that strategy? I mean, you're still relatively new, like that's a big risk in hinging it on that. So it's interesting. It's interesting.
Well, I mean, if we knew the results are bad, we wouldn't be hinging on that, right? But I'll say that. I'll say that for one thing. But we put out a lot of data, right?
Sure.
About people wanting to gravitate to the platform. It is a matter of degrees. I don't think, but we don't know what those numbers are. We can't dial in. That's why we haven't given out any revenue guidance, right? We don't know what those conversion rates are going to be. We don't know where everything is. We feel comfortable that people want to do this. We've already put out some data there. But listen, I mean, if everything goes south, right, and you have nothing, I mean, then where are you as a company? And we have a lot of things that we don't talk about. There's this micropayment opportunity, for instance, and this flex revenue platform that we have. I mean, honestly, I could give you a story and a pitch on that in and of itself as an infrastructure provider in the Vodacast and the whole audio space and the video space that could easily be a unicorn company. So there's a lot going on in this area. We're playing in a lot of it. Our focus right now is on getting faidr out there, getting results on that, getting Vodacast out there, getting results on that, and then building pretty significant platforms in both of those areas. But do we have other ideas and other things that we could pursue based on those results? Absolutely. And that's really our history. Very cool.
All right, Jeff. Well, first, thank you for answering all my questions here. I got one more for you to close us out. I asked this to everybody to finish this up, and relatively new, right, on the public market side. So how is it being executive chairman of a public microcap company? How are you enjoying it?
Well, listen, I love it. I mean, I think, I've been on the private side with a lot of companies, and this is the first time on the public side. But I can tell you, all the negatives you hear about being a public on the public side before you get there, things you hear about, there's all this excess cost, there's all this excess regulation, all this excess work. I basically see none of that. It's about transparency. It's about access to capital, which is so much better than it is on the private markets. So I really like it. And I get better feedback, honestly, from the public market investors than I do from the private investors that we have who are juggling, 5, 10, 15 companies. So to me, it's been great. And I think the CEO loves it too. We split the work up. He operates, and he functions and make sure the company is executing. I do the IR stuff and tell the story and try to get investors excited. So it's been great for us.
Very good. All right. Well, Jeff, with that, where can our audience go and find more information on Auddia?
Yeah, you can go to our website. We have 3 different websites, one on the faidr app and one for Vodacast. And then we have one for the corporate side as well. The corporate one is going to be transitioning over from www.auddiainc inc.com to www.auddia.com, but you can type in either one and you'll be forwarded to whatever we have active. That's where our IR page is. If you want to know more about the faidr app itself, you just go right to the www.faidr.com. And for Vodacast, the same.
Very good. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye now.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.